हेलो एवरीवन। सो लास्ट वीडियो में हमने क्वेश्चन नंबर 9 सॉल्व किया था, दैट इज राइजिंग टेम्परेचर। सो इस वीडियो हम सॉल्व करने वाले हैं क्वेश्चन नंबर 10, दैट इज एवरेज टाइम ऑफ प्रोसेस पर मशीन। सो लेट्स गेट स्टार्टेड। Okay, so the question has one table, that is activity, and it has four columns: machine ID, process ID, activity type, and then the timestamp. Okay, so the table shows the user activity for a factory website. Machine ID, process ID, and activity type is the primary key. That is the combination of these columns will be unique for this table. Machine ID is the ID of the machine. Process ID is the ID of the process uh, running on the machine with the ID, machine ID. Activity type is an enum, which means it can has two values, that is start or end. Timestamp is a float representing the current timestamp in second. Start means that the machine starts the process at a given timestamp, and means that the machine ends the process at a given timestamp. The start timestamp will always be before the end timestamp for every machine and process ID. This is the machine and it is running a process, and in that process, the start will always be before the end. As it is obvious, start will always be before the end. It is guaranteed that each machine, and in that machine there is a process, and this pair has a start and end timestamp, which means if a process is started in a machine, it has to end. So the end, there will be an entry with the machine ID and process ID, and it will have an activity type. So there will always be two entries with this combination, and in this combination the machine ID will be same, the process ID will be different, but with this process ID the activity must have start and end, and with this process ID there will be start and end activity type. So there is a factory website that has several machine, each running the same number of processes. Write a solution to find the average time each machine take to complete the process. The time to complete a process, a single process, that is a machine ID, in a machine which has a machine ID, is running a process, and that process is started at X timestamp and end at Y timestamp. Then the time to complete that process is N timestamp minus the start timestamp. Okay, and the average time is calculated by total time to complete every process on machine. So a machine can have many processes, and the end minus start is the time taken by a single process to complete, and for the average is the total time to complete every process divided by the number of process the machine is running, right? Now the resulting table have the machine ID along with average time as a process time, which should be rounded to 3 decimal place. Now we'll look at one of the example given. So you see in this activity table we have two machines, machine 0, machine 1, and machine 2. The machine with ID 0 has two process, the process 0 and process 1. So first process, that is 0, start and end, then the other process 1, it also start and end. So as given in the question that every process will start and end, so there is no process which only have end or start, this is not possible. So every process has start and end. So now what we want is the machine ID and the processing time. So how do we calculate this? So we have three machines, 0, 1, and 2, that is the machine ID, right? And now we have to calculate the average, that is average of time taken by every process, their sum, and then divide by total processes. So we have, for example, in the machine ID 0 we have two process, 0 and 1. The 0th process takes time, that is 1.520 minus 0.7112, that is time taken by this process. Time taken by this process is 4.120 minus 3.140. These is the time taken by these two processes. Now we add these two times, divide by 2, because we have two processes here. That is the average time taken by this machine. So let's see the explanation here. So there are three machines running two processes each. 0 is also running two process, 1 is also running two process, and 2 is also running two processes. For the machine 0, the first process take this much time, second process take this much time. We add these two and divide by number of processes it is running. So you might not have understood this explanation, but let's just write the query so that you can understand it better. So first Okay, so how should we approach this? You see that this machine, for example, this machine 0 has two processes, that is start and end, right? And we want the end minus start, but we cannot like write a query to reference from the same table. So we are referencing the same table. For example, end minus this start. So there are two entries in the same table and we have to subtract them, which means we have to self join this table. So that's the hint. So let's do a rough query that do a self join. So we'll select everything from activity table, comma activity table. But since these two tables are same, we have to give them different names. Now let's see what's the result of this query. So this query will have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and then 12. 12 into 12, that is 144 rows. And we have to eliminate the redundant rows. Let me copy this result and show you what result we got. So this is the result that we got by running our query. Now you see this is the machine ID 0. You see machine ID 0 is doing like when we did the cross joining for the machine 0, we got many replicated rows and most of them is redundant. So how should we remove these redundant rows? Now let's go to the query and try to remove these redundant rows. Now we know, since we have joined this table to itself, this means this entry should be valid. So here we have machine ID, here we have machine ID, here it has 2, it has 0, which is wrong. So the first condition is where a dot machine ID is a dot machine ID. The next condition is, you see this has a machine ID of 2, this has 0. Now let's suppose this is also 2. Okay, so we have 2 here and 2 here, let's suppose. Now what we want is this machine should also have same process. Okay, so the other condition is this machine, this entry should also have same process ID in the two tables, because the left table is equal to the right table, right? So entry should be valid. Process ID is equal to a dot process ID. Then the next thing, first let's see what the result of this query. So now you see in the result almost like we are left with very little rows compared to 144 rows. So in this, if you see that the machine ID in the left table is equal to machine ID in the right table, and also the process IDs. So for example, this is the machine 0 which has process ID of 1. Then in the right table also we have machine ID 0 and process ID of 1. Now the next condition which you have to check is that uh, if there is a machine ID 0 with a process ID of 0 and it has a activity of start, then on the right table we want that same machine on the same process, but it is ending and not starting. So we want that in the right table a dot activity type is start, and on the right table we want it to end. Now let's see the result. Okay, so this is the result we got. So we have machine ID 0 and it is running a process. This is the same machine and the same process, but in this process we have start and in this we are ending. So the left table is starting and the right table is stopping the process. Okay, so we have three machine. Each machine has two entries and each entry starts and ends. Start and start end, right? Now we want to calculate the time taken by each process. Okay, then eventually we will calculate the average time. Now how should we calculate the average or processing time? You see, we want a single machine ID in the resulting table, that is 0, 1 and 2, which means we have to join these entries based on machine ID only. Okay, So if we join based on machine id, these two rows will be merged, these two rows will be merged, and these two rows will be merged. So first we'll do is merging. When these two rows are merged, we will sum these values, that is end values. We will sum these two values and subtract them. So what I mean is, when these first two rows are merged, what we will do is, for example, for the machine id 0, we have end time as these. We will sum these. So when you merge, since it creates a single entry, that single entry will have this value, and then we subtract from the start time, that is 3.14 plus 0.712. This will give us partial processing time, which is not a correct result. So the correct will be, when we merge these two rows, we will get a count, that is how many rows are merged, and that count will give us the average processing time. Now let's try to do this in the query. So we'll have to group by machine ID. When we do this, what we want is only machine ID, and we want the average. So there is a function average in the SQL. So we want to calculate the average of sum of right entries, right? So AA table dot timestamp. AA table is this right table. In this we have timestamp. So we'll sum these two, and these two, and subtract from sum of A dot timestamp. Okay, so and we want the result of this with the column processing time. Okay, so we see that when we join these two tables, we have machine ID in the left table and in the right table. So we can take any column. So let's say we take column from the first table. We didn't write A dot or AA dot, we got the error because machine ID will be ambiguous in that case. Here also we will have to write A dot machine ID. Okay, so it says that the invalid use of group function. So I see the mistake is here. We don't have to sum this. Okay, before that, let me show you different way. So we remove the average function and just divide by using count star. Pass partially, because in the result, so like in the problem, it is given that we have to return the result to be rounded to the three decimal place. So there is a function in the SQL that is round, and we have to round the result to the three decimal places. So we'll use this. So test cases has been passed, but let me show you the average use of the average function. So here, instead of dividing by the count star, we will use the average function, and here we don't have to use the sum because the average function do it by itself. So average of for each entry, it will do this. So let me show you in the. So what average will do is, it will take this value and then start, it will subtract it. Okay, then it will do for this entry, for all, for this machine ID, I'm saying for this as machine ID, it will do subtraction, then do subtraction, and then it will add, and then it automatically divides by the 2. So here it will do this for these grouped entries, and then average will divide these sum by the count the merge has given to the average function. And in the previous query, where we were using the sum of the right timestamp minus sum of the left timestamp divided by count star, in that case, what we were doing was, we were doing some of these entry these values in the timestamp, then doing sum of these two values in the group, and then we were subtracting and dividing by count star. But what average will do is it will subtract these two values, subtract these two values, then it will do a sum and then divide by the count star, right? So let's see if this query works or not. Okay, so our test cases has been passed. Now let's try to submit this and let's see if the query ran successfully or not. So our solution got accepted.